Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. And I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. We're going to talk about plastic pollution, which is growing with the volume of plastic produced. And that is up 4.4% a year on average since the global financial crisis in 2007. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's Global Plastics Outlook reports that 22 million tons of plastic pollution entered the environment in 2019. And if society continues plastic business as usual, 44 million tons of plastic will pollute the world's waters, land, and animal bodies by 2060. Our guest today is Dimitris Faloutsos. He is the head of Transboundary Waters at the United Nations Global Water Partnership. Chatham House, a London-based policy institute, collaborated with the Global Water Project to release a recent report, Why Lifecycle Solutions Are Needed to Tackle Marine Plastic Pollution. It argues that many solutions, including the Developing Global Plastics Treaty under discussion in the United Nations system, along with increased investment in collection and processing plastic with transparency about the performance at every step in the process to create accountability, is necessary to address the crisis. The report also argues that plastic pollution, which costs society about $100 billion a year now, will continue to grow until emerging strategies pioneered in Europe, Japan, and Chile, along with new ideas and technologies to prevent plastic pollution from reaching the ocean, are deployed worldwide. In other words, we have some ideas and technologies necessary, but it's a matter of putting them to work while continuing to learn and improve the system. You can read the GWP Chatham House report at circulareconomy.earth/publications. Circular economy is all one word, no dash, no space, circulareconomy.earth/publications. Now let's get into the conversation. Welcome to the show, Dimitris. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. Friday afternoon, looking forward for the weekend. Thanks.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I know it's late on a Friday in Europe, and we appreciate you getting on and to talk about how plastic pollution is growing and what we might be able to do about it. I wanted to start off just with a basic question. How does plastic pollution cost society $100 billion a year? What are some of the ways its impacts are felt?
First of all, I forgot to thank you for the invitation. Nice to be with Earth911. And Friday afternoon, nice. It's a nice way to close a working weekend.
Thank you.
You have a nice discussion. Now, there are quite a number of economic and social estimates in recent years with regard to the cost of this management of plastic. And there are different figures depending on the point of view. Plastic pollution on rivers, for example, Deloitte estimates this anywhere between 6 and 19 billion globally in 2018, quite a range. Nevertheless, even if we go to the low end, that this indicator of the magnitude of the problem, if one looks at the climate impacts of plastics and the estimates of the social cost of one ton of plastic is at least 840 euros. I don't know what's this dollars. More than
it's about $920.
This would include CO2 emissions, etc. And the global scale, this amounts almost to 300 billion euros per year. Social costs associated with plastic-related chemicals. That's another point of view. This already exceeds $100 billion per annum.
So those would be healthcare costs associated with the impact of the plastic additives on our bodies?
Yes, one shouldn't be surprised for this because there's by assessing the financial effects of in the environment, that is a way of having some kind of common language, so as one is able to compare different things. So the audience should not be shocked by. I mean, there are even figures attached to loss of lives. But this is just a language to use, so we're able to communicate. So, social costs with plastic and chemicals, that's huge. It's 100 billion per annum. And if you go to corporate liabilities, that's 20 billion in the US alone. And this goes on and on. But as I said, these are numbers. These are numbers to be able to communicate the magnitude of the issue And this is not a precise science. There is a lot of uncertainty in this, and one could also say, come on, this is arguments in favor of action, but on the other hand, could argue about apart from the precision of the numbers, it is the profits of businesses around the plastic production consumption. So someone that is not liberal enough would say, yes, this is the cost, but what about the profits? So one should treat all those numbers with caution. But what is undoubtable is the images that I'm sure you have come across, like the garbage patch floating in the Pacific Ocean. It's twice the size of Texas. You can touch whatever number you want on this. We do know plastic fibers, and this is science behind it, in corals in the Atlantic Ocean. They found that corals readily ate plastic over food, dying marine mammals, which is a nice image in terms of creating emotional reactions for audiences. But it is indicative about the ocean, the problem. And microplastics, these are not visible. Microplastics are defined as plastics are smaller than 5 millimeters in length.
And they're in our bodies.
It's like, this was astonishing. It was astonishing, and I was astonished to understand reading, being prepared for the discussion. Above 80% of freshwater, municipal tap water, and bottled water samples in many parts of the world contain microplastics. So, to sum up, there are health risks, environmental risks, it's growing cost for the governments, the taxpayers. These are the less liberal audience of ours. And even more, is growing financial risk for corporate investments.
So I want to try to unpack because you've included a lot of impacts here, but I want to dig in on one question in particular. We're familiar with the social cost of carbon. We've talked about that in the show many times, which is the cost of the health impacts and cleaning up that ton of CO2. When you talk about the social cost of a ton of plastic, does that include its carbon impacts, its health impacts, and things like the estimated cost of cleaning up just one beach is $8,900 a ton of plastic. Does all that get rolled up into that €840 or $920 worth of social cost? How do you arrive at that number?
I will lie if I would tell you that I know exactly the methodology behind coming up with numbers. There is science behind this, and there are environmental finance people that do all those assessments. But again, we're focusing on numbers. Well, I would like to focus on facts that are undeniable. We spoke a bit about how numbers one can say, it's not exactly this. There are different numbers, or compare these with the profits. It is about our lives. Earth can carry on without us. The question is, are we going to be on Earth, or Earth as a system will continue without the presence of people? For example, we have recognized the carbon footprint, okay, and we need to recognize the notion of plastic footprint as well. In this fight to preserve the planet, there is a monstrous reservoir of plastic particles we keep creating, and has to be seen as a toxic debt on to the future. So beyond numbers are good to take decisions, but we need as basis to understand where we're standing. And after we understand where we're standing, after we understand this, then we can speak about numbers and how those numbers can assist in decision being taken. And I don't want to sound like a romantic activist that says, save the planet. No. Society includes entrepreneurs, includes businesses, includes us that we work somewhere. So yes, we speak about numbers, but first we need to understand the level of the problem.
So I absolutely agree about the numbers. Here's the question then. If you look at the social cost of a ton of plastic, and you look at the profits of the companies that are being reported that manufactured that plastic, is that profit an illusion because we've simply pushed the long-term cost of the plastic down the road?
illusion. Exactly. I mean, your question includes also the response.
Mm-hmm.
If we take into consideration, if we look everything in the next year, one may say exactly. I mean, the profit is larger than the cost. But if we go in the long term, and the fact that we're having a monstrous reservoir of plastic particles that we keep creating, and this is like a toxic debt onto the future. And this toxic debt, one can apply science. The economists can actually translate this toxic debt into specific numbers, like the ones we discussed about previously.
So, where does most of this plastic pollution come from? How do we particularly stem the flow of waste from North America to the rest of the world?
I don't know exactly about North America, considering that the policy is pretty sound in the major part of North America, and there is the appropriate infrastructure. I would doubt that is the hotspot. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has analyzed different groups of countries, and every analysis needs to be based on a set of criteria. Would they use this policy stringency, existing plastic waste infrastructure, per capita plastic consumption, and plastic leakage rates? Now, what they found is that large emerging economies have been are those that pollute the most. These have typically moderate policy stringency infrastructure for plastic waste management, but high rates of waste generation and plastic consumption. On the other hand, the low-income countries, they tend to have low per capita plastic consumption, but they also lack basic waste management and collection services, and they have higher leakage in the water sources and marine environment.
As you pointed out, the OECD has done an analysis, identified 1,650 or so rivers, most of which are in Asia, that are the sources of plastic. What can the UN and the Global Water Partnership do in order to help drive us in the right direction? What kinds of policies or incentives do we need to put in place?
You have included there many questions into one.
Yes.
The means and who. If I would break your question down in two. First of all, indeed, there are the 80% of global emission of plastic waste into the ocean comes from something more than 1,500 rivers, and those are the majority of which lies in Asia. And if we need to point our figures to specific countries, that would be Philippines, India, and Malaysia. Now, in terms of what can be done, it depends on the predominantly, it is the countries that need to take action. And we go after that, after we address that part, we can extend our discussion on what the UN can do and the international organizations can do, being only a part of the stakeholders in this story. So regarding the countries, there is infrastructure is a huge issue.
Okay.
In most of the countries, there is no basic waste collection and management services. And 2 billion people currently lack these basic waste services. And by 2040, additional 1.5 billion people will need to be connected to waste collection and management services. And we're speaking about low-income countries. You can understand that municipal budgets cannot cover the respective costs. So it is not about more collecting the garbage in plastic. It's about what do we do to reduce the plastics that are being produced. That's another story as well. We'll come in a bit on this. Now, if we go to low-level countries, and in the absence of infrastructure and the likelihood of having infrastructure fast enough in these countries, we can use whatever is available. And in many of these countries, we have waste pickers. The ILO estimates there are up to 15 million informal waste figures globally. And many countries depend on the informal sector for collecting majority of plastics. In Northern Africa, and specific country, Morocco, 85% of all plastic waste collected is being collected by this informal part. What can be done in the short term is by those countries having the policy measures in place that will strengthen this part and be able to have these persons gaining a part of the profits that is appropriate to those instances. Now, it's not those that gain the major part of the income in this regard. Uh-huh. In the medium term, it should be that specific countries that are active in development aid should assist those low-income countries in developing the necessary infrastructure. When it comes to medium-income countries and in the developed countries, then we're speaking clearly about policies that need to be put forward. And here is where UN agencies, the international communities, and the governments can work jointly for policies. And we can discuss about policies because I feel we have a question for that.
Well, so that's actually the next question is looking at models that seem to be working. You identified the EU generally, which has several new policies, including the Waste Framework Directive, the Packaging Waste Directive, and the Circular Economy Action Plan. But you also point out Japan and Chile doing a good job. Can you tell us what generally shared themes there are across the good ideas and how we might think about beginning to enact them in policy?
In EU, EU is forward looking in the area in this regard. I mean, it's been already since the 90s that there was specific action. Now, through the directives, there are recycling targets that are set. There are circular design requirements of plastic packaging products for over a decade now. And now there's a new circular economy action plan from the 2020. And the EU policies are increasing in ambition, and the EU plastics policy is entering a new phase for a more transformative policy targeting and towards full life cycle of plastics. And this is where we need to head to. And we'll come to this in a bit. In Japan and in Chile, they have set these high goals. They're doing things about single-use plastic packaging waste accounts. They do things about leakage into the environment and water resources. They have, in 2019, Japan introduced a plastic resource circulation strategy that sets new goals to turn all existing plastic packaging goods to either reusable or recyclable by 2025 and 2030. In Chile, there are ambitious aims as well: elimination of problematic single-use plastics, 100% plastic packaging to be designed to be recyclable, reusable, or compostable, etc. But if I may, again, it feels thinking to the life cycle solutions. Already those actions seem to be marginally old-fashioned. Allow me this expression. Or not enough provide the solution that the planet needs, or no, the human race needs. The planet, as we said, will continue functioning one way or the other. By the way, do you know that in the dispatch in the Pacific, there is an ecosystem already there?
Yeah, in fact, it's become almost like a floating island with
exactly. I mean, that means that nature will carry on one way or the other.
Well, hopefully with us. And that's really the question. So, and of course, the Global Plastics Treaty is going to have a lot of impact on this, but I want to take a quick commercial break and we're going to be right back to continue the conversation. Hey, extended producer responsibility, change makers, let's unite. Meet me and the Earth911 team in Portland, Oregon this September at the 2023 U.S. Product Stewardship Forum, the nation's only conference dedicated to EPR legislation and best practices. The circular economy is being crafted today, brick by brick, with EPR legislation, and packaging recycling efforts are leading the way. 2022 saw unprecedented momentum, with 18 states considering over 60 EPR bills, and 6 became law. This year in Portland, you'll find exclusive insights from globally recognized EPR experts. The Product Stewardship Institute invites you, the movers who will shake their regional recycling and composting systems with new ideas. Network. Hone your EPR knowledge and form strategic alliances to drive the circular results this world needs. Now is the time for producer responsibility. So join us at the 2023 U.S. Product Stewardship Forum in Portland, Oregon. That happens from September 11th to 14th. Register today at productstewardship.us. Product stewardship is all one word, no space, no dash. Productstewardship.us. Be a part of the solution, because stewardship starts with you. Let's get back to the discussion with Dimitris Faloutsos of the Global Water Partnership about their collaboration with Chatham House on a new report, Why Lifecycle Solutions Are Needed to Tackle Marine Plastic Pollution. Dimitris, as we think about the numbers we discussed in the first part of the conversation, obviously we have to price in the collection and recycling of this material. Otherwise, it's not going to be addressed. Have you given much thought to the question of how we should start thinking about pricing plastic products in order to support the infrastructure that's necessary to clean them up?
I've heard you and others many times referring to collection and recycling. I mentioned previously about, I used the phrase old-fashioned approaches. We should not focus on collection and recycling. Collection and recycling is what we have been doing, nevertheless, and one would say yes. Using the market and using the right prices may have incentives and disincentives, and would lead everything towards the direction that we would like to. Nevertheless, this is only a part of what should be done, and everybody now, at least in UN treaty as well, they speak about life cycle approach to plastic.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the life cycle approach. Break that down.
Which is much more than this collecting and recycling. The life cycle approach identifies key hotspots in the production and consumption system by considering all potential impacts to the climate, the ecosystem, and the economy caused by plastic products, goods, or services. And this approach helps to address the potential trade-offs between environmental impacts and can guide the selection of the best solutions for the environment with the best socioeconomic implications. There is a range of stakeholders that should be involved, that has a role in this regard. The national governments that are responsible for policies, the businesses, the local and regional authorities, international organizations, and the scientific community. And this is where the Integrated Water Resources Management approach, or GWP, has a role to play. Unlikely the integrated waste management that focus on single pollution streamlines. The IWRM works with all stakeholders, promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources to maximize economic and social welfare in a way that's equitable. Now, because of this, we have been and we will be working with all stakeholders for waste management. And by the time that these key hotspots through the life cycle approach is being identified, then what comes next as part of the life cycle approach is to, and this is the focus. There are five areas of action, if I may. So the first is to reduce demand of unnecessary or harmful plastic products.
Should the governments ban certain materials in order to achieve that reduction?
No, it depends. If it's harmful for health, this goes without saying. But there are certain things that cannot be substituted tomorrow. This can and there are policies, there are economic instruments, levies, or who can remove subsidies, for example. So after reducing demand, the second is to encourage design for circularity. This can be done through approaches such as mandatory recycle common levels, modulated extended producer responsibility schemes, etc., etc. The third would be to enhance the recycling rates, and here comes recycling, but this is one of the three already, right? Introduce deposit return schemes, etc., etc. The fourth is to close the leakage pathways, identified hotspots, and the final area of focus is on the cleanup of leaked plastic. As it stands now, most of the action is being done in cleaning the plastic that has already arrived in the marine environment, or in the freshwater pathways, or do something for collection and recycling at best. Whereas in the life cycle approach, those are 5 areas of action, and we need the policies to put forward specific activities, specific measures for these 5 areas of action to be implemented to as many countries as possible. The EU, as indicated previously, it leads the way. And we go in Europe, we're lucky enough, we go slowly from recycling to life cycle approach. Does it work? Is it successful? At least there are actions to put these things forward. And I think, yes, I mean, the European Union is a lighthouse in many aspects in terms of the environmental policy.
As you look at the negotiations around the Global Plastics Treaty and thinking about the life cycle approach, where do you see the negotiations headed as we finalize that draft agreement? Will they emphasize all of the things that you just described: reduction, recycle, or design for recycling, better recycling? How do you see that becoming law?
I cannot give details. I'm not following, closely the negotiations, but I think that there's a very positive sign. The fact that the countries have given the mandate to prepare a draft agreement to be negotiated in Nairobi, that is great. I do know that the treaty aims to address plastic pollution across the full life cycle. And this language I expect to be included in the draft agreement. What the treaty can be done and is expected to be done is to establish clear targets and timelines to reduce plastic production volumes, to provide overall policy guidance at the global level, and to connect with other multilateral agreements, such as the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, etc., etc. The treaty also has a role to play in leveling the playing field for more circular solutions and addressing the existing economic incentives that drive plastic production. Nevertheless, the system is not ready for this kind of things yet.
Well, so that brings us to the question of how much money do we need to put to work here to start to solve the problem? As you pointed out, 2.2 billion people don't have any waste management services today. The plastics industry has become a global participant in everyone's lives without having to support the full infrastructure to take care of that material, to paint it with a very broad brush. So what would a successful solution look like, in your opinion, as we work toward the treaty, and how much do you think that will cost?
Environmental problems are complex. Environmental problems comes as a result of a multiplicity of factors that are stretching among countries and economic sectors, etc. So there's no silver bullet for anything. And the same goes for the treaty. I heard your question, but I'll start with the treaty.
No worries.
The treaty can assist in coordinating and setting the standards and the benchmarks, etc., etc. Nevertheless, this alone cannot do everything. As you know, there's no global marshal to impose the to enforce the implementation of the agreement. The countries need to do something themselves. When it comes to the developed countries, they know the solution, they know what they need to do, and in the short term, we have the necessary infrastructure in place and to develop the policies. And indeed, the countries, the developed countries, and those that produce plastics need to take responsibility vis-a-vis the countries that cannot invest the necessary amounts in the short, medium term. It is our planet, and inaction when it comes to developing countries would have a cost later on developed countries. So it can be seen as an investment for the planet. So you asked me about specific numbers. I cannot give specific numbers. In the beginning of our discussion, we discussed about estimates about the cost, and at some point I told you that there is the cost estimation is between 6 and 16 billion. So you can understand the range. The range is huge. So exact number nobody would know, I guess. Nevertheless, it's going to be a lot of money for this kind of infrastructures, but for the short term, for the medium long term policy towards life cycle approaches. This is the point.
Do you see in the negotiations a continued influence from the petrostates? They delayed a lot of the negotiations in Nairobi recently. Do you see their influence preventing us from making the kinds of regulations to reduce hard to recycle materials?
Yes. The response is yes. The response is yes, and it has to do with the way the global economy is structured. I would say something that may sound like I deviate, but I don't. I think this is in the center. Imagine you're a CEO, and you have you're leading a company that is in stock market in New York. Your aim would be profits, and the profits has to do with the stock of your company. And in this regard, you will not, since the market does not internalize the externalities and does not and your stock price does not internalize the projected harm to the environment, you will do nothing. Because you're not paid to do something for the environment for the future. You'll be paid for your stock, for your enterprise, and to have profits. So in this regard, the states that produce plastic, the petrostates and the companies that have their base in the petrostates, they're doing their work. The thing is, their business. The thing is what the others are doing. Of course, not these and other parties are not supported for legal binding and high vision outcome that would address the full life cycle of plastics. We need to be careful. This is previously what the others are doing. We need to be careful so we don't end up like a Paris Agreement style outcomes for climate, where we have like the to lack a vision and to have national commitments to reduce plastics. This will not be insufficient. We need something that will be more structured and have specific targets and specific timelines.
Well, to your point about the profit motive here, that's a profit that's calculated without understanding the future cost that a company may ultimately be liable for. And that's the whole debate about whether or not ESG reporting is relevant. Should we count the future? So as you think about those hard guidelines that you just described, how do we enforce them? Does the UN, for instance, have a mechanism to enforce limits on production or recyclability, design for recyclability?
No, there's as said, there's no global marshal, and I mean this is not.
Well, could we create one? Could we create one?
No, this is not a prison. This is the architecture. This is the global architecture. This is how things work. I mean, this is how it is. The right tools can be in place. I was discussing recently in work, we were discussing about water food energy nexus, and there were people from enterprises and there were people from governments, and there were discussions about the projections or regarding climate change and the impact to water resources and how these are taken into consideration as potential risks by the insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a tool. The rating of the bonds or the rating of the debt or the rating that the insurance companies may give or whether they insure a product or not, a business or not, name it, this is a tool that the enterprises cannot close their eyes to. The stock market will take into consideration. And if you ask me, we're late. It could be the case that this kind of policy measures could be taken earlier on when it comes to climate change. And since we're discussing now about plastics, yes, should some kind of this, some kind of such policy measures should be taken into consideration. I'm not again an expert in economics, environmental economics, etc. But I think that such policy management measures can be found and can drive things forward.
Ultimately, could this be something that consumers could have a much greater influence on if they had more information, more transparency about not just the impact of plastic, but the long-term cost of the health and cleanup of plastic?
Not an easy response. Yes and no.
Okay.
Transparency is always great. This goes along with awareness raising, and this has to do with choice. Nevertheless, and this is a question of like a rhetorical scheme. Does this, at the end of the day, concern developed countries that have a culture of preserving the planet and does not concern this part of the population that we're trying to survive? And what is this part of the population in numbers? I think it's a majority. So we're discussing about choices of consumers. Do we include those that, for example, have a plastic bag because they do not have a leather bag? Mm-hmm. And the question would be: Would you choose a leather bag versus a plastic bag? I mean, do you get the question to this level? I think not. Neither you nor I. The thing again is to go back. The governments need to take responsibility. And the questions that such the ones you addressed, although yes, it has to do with constituency, transparency, may be the ones that may push the governments towards taking specific decisions in favor of the environment and our existence in the long term. This is part of the discussion. I think that the governments have all the scientific knowledge or the data that are necessary to take the decisions that they should, rather than expecting the constituencies to push the government to take those decisions. So, although I would have a long discussion over your question over why, this is actually not a question, if I may, when it comes to action to tackle the problem we're discussing about today, which is plastic pollution.
Well, so I'm struggling to put together the market-based solution, because you clearly anchored this in the marketplace and the realities with which we live economically and politically at this point. How could someone sitting at home today find out how to make a difference? Do you have thoughts on what each of us can do, regardless of the time it takes to influence our representatives, to get the kinds of regulations you're describing in place?
Well, that's a question that touches upon almost every aspect of our society.
Well, in the last thousand years of political theory here, I mean, we're talking...
exactly. I mean, first of all, each one of us make choices based on the way you understand life and our conscience. So the one is just to make the choice that you feel that each one of us feel that is right. And to the extent that we can exercise our political rights, to do it in a way that will be in favor of the right decisions. But it is the action of the one versus the action of the society, or versus, in relation to the action of the society. I think the societies, the Western societies, have all the necessary tools, the structures, and the processes to evaluate the situation and take the correct action.
So how?
Yes.
How do we assess the actions that we're going to see over the next few years? What would, back to numbers, what would you measure to say we've made a meaningful difference in the life cycle of plastic?
We need to go back to the UN Treaty. There is a need for an approach, to a coordinated approach among the countries. We need to set targets. We need to set specific time frames in terms of reducing plastic pollution. That is an indicator. Accompanying indicators could be the recycling, could be the reduction of the production of plastics, the technology. We have the technology, most probably. The governments need to take those policy measures that will drive the markets, to drive towards products that is probably substitute plastic, etc. I will go back to the life cycle approach. The closing, we're close to the end of our discussion, if I understand correctly. The message should be that it is not just collecting, cleaning, and recycling. Is a life cycle approach, and this has to do with the way we do things in our everyday lives, each one of us, but mostly collectively, and collectively this has to do with our governments and the way they're doing it. And when it comes to the India, to go back to your question, the interaction between the individual and the government, as you rightfully said, the 1,000 years of political philosophy that is necessary to be applied to give response to this, and it is the same as every other significant issue where the government's decision and the action of the individual is
involved. So my last question, really, I'll try to put a fine point on this. Do we have the system, the political and social systems that we need to get through the climate and plastics crises?
I think yes.
Okay.
I think that the systems in the Western countries have the structure and the procedures and the processes to take the right decisions. They should do it.
It just takes courage. It just takes courage.
It's not about courage. It's about common sense. It's pure it is indeed common sense, and one needs to see the bigger picture. And I'm not just putting there a phrase that is everybody uses, bigger picture in terms of if this is applied in the market, in the decisions in terms of the politicians that will go beyond the 4 or 5 year cycle of the election cycle. If one sees the big picture in terms of time, where the plan would be 10, 15 years, then the decisions are easy. It's not about courage. It's about common sense.
Well, but common sense, we can see the common sense, but to make the political decision to put your office at risk by going against, for instance, your largest funders, who are often petrochemical companies, is the big challenge. I mean, and ultimately, as citizens looking up to our government for that kind of leadership, we seem to be at sea right now.
indeed, there may be some difficult decisions that need to be made, but even, let's say, the funders, I mean, if these are explained, that in the first explained, but in the long term, it is the viability of their business that we're talking about. And then the tough decision is just to take this, to put in place this policy instrument that will go along with the explanation that, you know what, you need to take because you need to internalize the costs, or if this is possible, if this is difficult, you need to take into consideration the projected risks in terms of your business. Would climate change affect you? Would plastic pollution affect your business? If this is internalized, if this is taken into consideration in the way you're taking your decisions, they will become common logic even for the enterprises.
I certainly hope that we arrive at that moment when common sense overwhelms greed.
I do understand. I do know that I sound romantic. I'm perfectly aware of this, but you know, if we don't have this kind of hope, then I don't think I can get out and enjoy my weekend, knowing that all the wrong decisions will be taken, and my daughter will live in a planet, and I'm gone. That is that only those that have the means can survive.
Dimitris, I completely concur. We need that hope. It is our species' ability to look ahead and see a better outcome and then work to get to it that defines us. But the question is whether we will do so, and it's an open question. I thank you so much for spending time to talk about this today.
It was my pleasure. I certainly hope that something will be done. It can be done differently.
Well,
it's black and white.
But we just don't have another 1,000 years of political theory to debate that.
No.
Well, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rich.
We've been speaking with Dimitris Faloutsos. He is the head of Transboundary Waters at the United Nations Global Water Partnership. You can learn more about the Global Water Partnership at unwater.org. UN Water is all one word, no space, no dash, unwater.org. And if you want to learn about Chatham House, the global think tank that participated in creating the program, check out chathamhouse.org. That's all one word, chathamhouse.org. Plastic politics. That's what we're up against. An industry and the apparent convenience that it delivers have swept the world, racing ahead of our understanding and accounting of the impacts of plastic while underinvesting in the infrastructure to clean up this historically novel material. Plastic, even more than oil, is the embodiment of the industrial economy. And as Dimitris pointed out, humanity is only now coming to terms with the long-term costs of plastic. The disastrous environmental consequences should make regulating plastic production a common-sense conclusion. But profits often blind us to the obvious. Dollars distract our attention from disasters of our own making. I suppose marketing is largely responsible for this, or at least irresponsible marketing. So what can we do? Reducing the production of hard-to-recycle and toxic plastics can prevent some pollution, but if we're going to continue to use this material, its full life cycle, from extracting oil to collecting, recycling, and reusing plastic, require diligent attention and debate. We need to use and make less plastic, but products must be designed to be easily recycled. Plastic markets, wherever soda is sold in bottles or plastic wrap covers food, must be built to collect and process the waste. And political leaders need to set goals and hold companies and communities accountable for their performance. If we want to change the market, we all need more information about the long-term health, environmental, and social costs of plastic. That can change our shopping decisions as consumers and give us the data that we need to demand change from our governments. We're going to help you keep an eye on the UN Global Plastics Treaty negotiations, which will be finalized in 2025. And that's really where, not to use a plastic-informed metaphor, but the rubber is going to meet the road. So stay tuned. Would you take a moment to share This podcast or any of the more than 400 interviews we produced on sustainability in your ear, writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. And folks, you're the amplifiers that help us spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, family, coworkers, the people you meet on the street that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and anywhere else that they might look for podcasts. Thanks, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.